Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good afternoon. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing well. Cold outside. I'm having a little spot of bother on my X machine here in the studio, but I'll correct that. Never you fear. I'll try to get some of these clips to you. I was going to play you the Ketanji Brown Jackson clip. I'll have to find it in an alternative way, but Ketanji Brown Jackson sounding like the dumbest Supreme Court justice in the history of the United States Supreme Court. I mean, that's all I can tell you. Comparing Ketanji Brown Jackson actually compared bans on sex changes for kids to bans on interracial marriage. That happened. That happened earlier today. In the meantime, a Democrat senator is calling on the Biden administration to extend deportation protection and work permit visas and the like for illegal aliens in the United States of America ahead of what is expected to be historic deportation campaign by the Trump administration. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada said on an X post, President Biden has the power to protect immigrant families, and I'm calling on him to use it. She pointed out the use of temporary protected status, which is a status administered by the Department of Homeland Security, allowing nationals who are living in the United States of America to obtain work permits and be shielded from deportation. And she's demanding that Joe Biden do this on the way out. I feel like Joe Biden's a little more concerned with his own immediate family and keeping those folks out of jail right now. But maybe that's just me. TPS grants protection to nationals from countries considered unsafe to return to. It has been used broadly by the Biden-Harris administration to protect hundreds of thousands of individuals from Haiti, Venezuela, and other nations. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has sought to provide additional safeguards for those protected from deportation via the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or the DACA program. In other words, liberal Democrats are not interested in the health and safety of American citizens, more so than they are interested in protecting the status of now illegal aliens currently in our country, regardless of whether or not those illegal aliens present a real and present danger to American citizens. You heard it on the Dan Mandis show this morning on Nashville's Morning News, where Dan was playing you the clip of the citizen in Chicago sick to death of, what's his name, Mayor Brandon Johnson, is that right? Of Chicago. Putting the protection of illegal aliens, many of whom are committing crimes in that city. Crime is running rampant in Chicago, running rampant in New York City, running rampant in many of our major metropolitan areas, thanks in part to some of the gang influence that has come across the southern border from places like Venezuela and Mexico and others. This is not to say, and no one suggests, that everyone that has come into the United States of America illegally wants to commit further illegal acts. I say further illegal acts because it's an illegal act in and of itself to come in illegally. But many of them do. They're taking advantage of an open border system to prey on the American population. And even liberals who vote liberal in liberal cities have noticed and are speaking back. Eric Adams out of New York. There's a reason that Eric Adams is speaking out about working with the Trump administration. There's a reason that he's talking about being willing to deport individuals who commit criminal acts in New York City. And it's not because suddenly he's found love for Donald Trump. It's not that Eric Adams suddenly found, as we say, religion on this issue. The voters of the city that elected him are demanding it because they see the reality of the criminal activity that comes with the rest of the illegal alien activity. Is it 100% of it? No. Is it a lot? Yes. Too much. And it could all be shut down. Instead of responding to the election on November 5th in a way that creates reflection, internal observation, going over what your policy positions were on any given number of issues and where maybe you failed to connect with the voters that elected the other guy Instead of doing that, the Democrats are doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on their policies. Failed policies that make Americans less safe. And they'll do everything in their power to get this embedded and entangled within the deep state that Donald Trump and many of us who support him want to untangle from the fabric of America. They're going to try to further entangle it as best they can before January 20th. And will if we let them. In the meantime, it's Lindsay's turn. Hello, Lindsay. How are you?
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Lindsay.
Well,
good.
I was wondering if Dan gave you a couple boxes of presents today.
He did not.
He left them in his car. I knew it.
Dan, as in Dan Mandis?
Yes, I gave him a couple boxes of presents yesterday with the instructions that as my own sweet vengeance for you roasting me in front of all of Nashville, my friends, God, and everybody, that you get to deal with the presents instead of poor Mac Maury running around. Ha-ha.
Well, I am happy to deal with your presents, Lindsay, at the point in time that I actually receive them.
All right,
yeah.
It's a deal. And
by the way, I loved the cup. The cup is one of my favorite things, although I think my battery got wet and it fried it. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I maybe could get you another.
Lindsay gave us, when was this last Christmas? Man, time flies. I don't remember either. Lindsay gave us these cups that had a battery in the bottom of them and these little electrodes. And if you put fluid in the connection would be made. You would bridge the connection, and the cup would light up in fancy colored lights.
Well, guess what? You get first dibs in the box.
Well, you're very kind.
Her first fault was trusting Dan Mandis with something to remember.
That's true. That's true. You trusted Mandis. That was the big failure in this plan. Thank you, Lindsay. And as soon as we can, I'll get up with Mandis and we will figure out how to distribute said gifts. I appreciate you. It's 1:45, Super Talk 99.7 WTN. As we have been mentioning, major issues being discussed at the Supreme Court level earlier today as the state of Tennessee presented their case as to why SB 1 and HB 1 should be confirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States. Justices heard nearly 2.5 hours of oral argument over a challenge to our Tennessee law, a law that many other states have put into place. To speak on this matter is Attorney General Steve Marshall of the great state of Alabama, and he joins us on the Murphy Show hotline this afternoon. Obviously, we want to talk to Steve about his perception of what's going on from an outside point of view. Just a reminder, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we have Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti joining us on the program to talk about his perspective. But in the meantime, it is good to talk to Attorney General Marshall again. Hey, Steve, glad to have you on with us, and I hope you're well, sir.
Hey, Matt, doing great. It's always good to hear your voice.
Man, it's good to hear you, too. Steve and I know each other from way back my days in Birmingham, Alabama, and all across the great state of Alabama. And I just want to publicly say to the state of Tennessee, for those who don't know, Steve, what a fabulous job you have done as Attorney General of that state, a state that I called home for the better part of 2 decades. Congratulations on everything you're doing down there.
Well, thank you. And, hey, today was an important day for not only Tennessee, but I think across the country, because the issue before the court in considering whether or not they're going to authorize this experimental care of kids that has long-term adverse effects. While it's Tennessee laws in question, there are states like Alabama and 25 other states across the country who are similarly situated.
So tell us your, without leading the witness in any way, Attorney General, tell us your perception of what you saw at the court today and how the line of questioning went with the justices.
Yeah, first of all, Matt, I think the folks in Tennessee need to be really proud of their Attorney General, General Skrmetti, and his Solicitor General, who I think did a phenomenal job today before the court. It was exhausting. I mean, you described it 2.5 hours. For oral argument. And
by the way, not to interrupt you, Attorney General, but for those who don't know, the Supreme Court is different than any other court you'll go into. And you know far better than me. I mean, in as much as you stand there and if they want to just pepper you with questions, you get peppered with questions, and it's coming from potentially 9 different ways, right?
It was. And frankly, depending on which side was up, there were 3 that were very active from both sides of the the ideological perspective. But I felt good about where we finished today. Interestingly, Justice Gorsuch, who was the author of the Bostock opinion, which dealt with transgender rights specifically in an employment setting, was completely silent, which I thought was fairly interesting. Doesn't really tell us one thing or another, but of all the judges, he was the only one that was not active in his questions. But one thing that I appreciated, particularly where Alabama has been on this, is that we've been litigating our case longer than most, which means that we've gotten into the underbelly of what really has gone on here. And the United States Solicitor General, through her brief, said that this was well-accepted practice of using cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers with kids, and that's simply not the case. And we were able to supply a brief that really laid all of that out when you have somebody like Rachel Levine, who contacts the standards organization called WPATH saying remove age restrictions on surgeries for kids, not because it's what's best for kids, but instead because it was hurting the political transgender agenda of the Biden administration. And so we were pleased to see Justice Alito pick up on not only, the overstatement and misrepresentation by the Department of Justice, but really cause the government and the advocates on the other side to have to walk back some of the outlandish and unsupported claims they've made about this treatment.
We are told, at least by the mainstream media, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, Steve Marshall joining us, Attorney General from the state of Alabama, that the heart of this question is the Equal Protection Clause. Is that the case? Is that what the judges were asking about for the most part, or what?
It is, and it's frankly, Matt, it's a nerdy legal question about whether or not rational basis or intermediate scrutiny is what courts use to evaluate this law. And I'll put it in another way that most folks can understand a little better. As a prosecutor for years, when I was trying to charge a crime, I had the burden of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's it's that burden that exists on the state to establish why they have legislated in a certain area that's at the heart of this matter. If it's rational basis, it's a lot easier for the state to be able to meet. That's what the Sixth Circuit used in evaluating Tennessee's law and upheld it. If the Supreme Court sends it back, it's not going to say that Tennessee can't do this. What it's simply going to say is, Tennessee, you have a higher burden of proving why it is that you passed this law. And candidly, Matt, we can meet that burden anyway. I mean, I think particularly with what Alabama has been able to uncover, it's very clear that not only has there been no systemic review of this treatment that has shown its effectiveness, but it is truly lacking in any kind of rigorous underpinning. And then we've seen from the Cass report, which I'm sure you've heard about, as well as other European countries that have completely backed away from this area. And it's remarkable that those advocates here in the United States don't want to acknowledge truthfully the fact that they just simply have no facts to be able to support what they're doing that doesn't necessarily indicate all of the adverse impact on kids as a result of these treatments.
Well, and it also feels, Attorney General, like the argument on the political left on this issue is that there ought not to be any form of government intervention between a parent, a medical provider, and services that they want to provide to their children. And for that argument, I mean, I would obviously say that there are plenty of examples that exist where the states believe that it is their right to intervene between that parental relationship with the child when the health and safety of the child is somehow at risk.
No, and you're exactly right. And what is also interesting here, and the court got into it a little bit, is kind of a fundamental tenet in medicine is you have informed consent when you agree to certain procedures or to take certain medicines. And what we've been able to uncover in Alabama is even those who adopted this standard acknowledge that we don't know how to explain this risk to parents, and kids clearly can't understand it. And if you're not informed when you allow your daughter to take a testosterone shot once a week in her leg, not evaluating whether or not it makes her sterile, won't be able to have children down the road, what other consequences may exist as a result of that, then how can you legitimately ever have informed consent? It's why, when I say this is a fraud of epic proportions, it truly is. And particularly when we see that these standards are adopted partly with the work of lawyers weighing in to be able to say, if you do this, it hurts our case. So we need to make sure that you don't allow studies to be published that are adverse to what we think is the appropriate conduct. Then we're not looking at helping kids. We're looking at advancing a political agenda, and that's not what it's supposed to be about.
Attorney General Steve Marshall joining us for the last few minutes, talking about the case argued before the United Supreme Court today. I think it's a fool's errand to question maybe where the court's going, but I feel like the three liberal justices are decidedly on one side of the issue, probably have at least 3, maybe even 4 votes on the other side of the issue. I mean, do you feel like this will be a 5-4 split decision, maybe even a 6-3? I mean, do you have any feel after listening to the arguments?
I think it's definitely 3 on the opposite side. They've already dissented in a case coming out of the state of Idaho that sort of indicated where they'll stand, and their questions today, I think, clearly indicated that. But I feel confident that there are 5 votes there, and hopefully Justice Gorsuch will come along as well. The court wasn't convinced that this was some gender distinction, but as the state of Tennessee, I think, aptly described it, this is describing restrictions based on procedures and your medical condition, not based on your gender. And I think the court was convinced that they need to make that distinction in this case. So I feel very good about what took place today. Again, kudos to the AG's office for their, I think, remarkable work. But hey, there were 51 supportive briefs that were filed for Tennessee's position. And there's an awful lot of people that care very much about this issue and care desperately about kids. And interestingly, it's not just a right and left question. Mm-hmm. Because you've got many that are in the gay and lesbian community that believe this is simply gay conversion therapy, that it's rather than allow kids to resolve their gender incongruence by ultimately understanding they're either gay or lesbian, this is a way of making those kids become transgender. And they likewise are very upset.
Well spent. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Steve, finally, in the few seconds that we have left, and you and I are friends for a long time, in the interest of disclosure, I'm going to tell you, when I have the Tennessee Attorney General on, I'm going to ask him to file some sort of brief against you in the state of Alabama to prevent the Alabama Crimson Tide from being in the college football playoffs. I don't know how we get this. I don't know how we get this across the finish line, but I just wanted you to know that you could expect that brief to come across your desk at some point down the road.
Well, your Bulldogs are having trouble winning against the Crimson Tide. Let's make that clear.
Hey, we want to keep them out any way possible, any means necessary.
Invitational. Oh, I love it, Matt. Always good to be with you.
All right, man. Take care, Steve. That's Steve Marshall, Attorney General. Got to take a quick time out. You heard the voice of Cameron Smith dissenting against my proposed brief. We'll talk to Cameron coming up at the next hour on Super Talk.